Mike, how are you? Thanks. Leo, thanks. It's great to be here. I was actually here with Ed and Mike's union just one Friday, right? So good to be back, and good to be with so many trade unionists and so many environmental activists and so many people that understand the importance and the synergy of both. My understanding is that that my friend from the Sierra Club, Michael, told a sort of a ham-handed joke about the Warriors. And I would only add this. He grew up in New Jersey, and now he lives in San Francisco, and he's a Warriors fan, a New York Yankee fan. And rooting for the Yankees and the Warriors is a little bit like rooting for Goldman Sachs. You know, it's just so you root for the ones with all the money and you root for the ones with all the privilege and the ones that have all the advantage, and as if that takes any real strength of character, like being Indians fans, Browns fans, Cavaliers fans. And then Leo does his little Steelers, whatever. But thank you, and Bill Hyde of the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, thank you for joining us. Thank you so much. Melissa Kropp from the Ohio Federation of Teachers is here. Melissa Cropperidge in the kind of middle back. Good to see you. You just heard from Secretary Perez, and you understand how important it is to have a Democratic president and what that means at EPA, what that means in energy, what that means at NLRB, what that means at the Department of Labor. Just 2 weeks ago, as the Secretary said, he was in Columbus, Vice President, and he and I flew to Columbus to announce the overtime rule. In my state alone, and these are generally almost never union workers, because union workers negotiate packages far better than what these workers have inflicted on them. But that overtime rule in Ohio, affecting people making $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year, that companies designate as supervisory and then work them way more than 40 hours a week, and they get paid not even time and a half. They don't even get paid straight time, those hours above 40. In my state, this state alone, 140,000 workers will get a raise or will get more time off with their families. And that's pretty incredible. Colin, thank you for your work. Kim Glass, thank you for the work she did. The executive director, Kim, when did Department of Commerce, made a huge difference working with Nora and others in my office on TPA. TPA is still not close to what we wanted. The labor movement, the environmental movement, those of us that are progressives in the Senate and the House, what I think most of the country didn't want, but her work there significantly improved it, and Kim, thank you for doing that. This is my real voice. I'm not sick, I don't smoke, I just talk this way. And there's a story about that some of you have heard. I apologize for that. My wife and I were at an event in a room about a third this size a number of years ago, and there were no tables and chairs. Everybody was sort of crammed together, standing there. And as I began to speak, this guy my wife had never seen, standing right next to her, turns to her and said, "God, I hate that guy's voice." She said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, when that guy speaks," and he goes like, "This is like fingernails on a blackboard." She said, "I like his voice." He said, "You like that guy's voice?" And she said, "Yeah, you know when I really like it?" And she goes like this and leans in. He leans in. She says, "I really like it when he wakes me up in the middle of the night and says, 'I love you, baby.'" So, true story. Anyway, Secretary Perez, I got to hear his comments, and at the end when he said thank you for your activism, what the Blue-Green Alliance has done, it's hard to believe it's a decade now, what the Blue-Green Alliance has done is just terrific. And it's really put aside the old saw that you can either be an environmentalist or you can care about growing the economy. You can either support strong environmental laws or you can support the labor movement. They're in contradiction, and you have shown how important, how untrue that is, and how there really is synergism and growth together that way. And again, with Secretary Perez and what the Labor Department has done with the EPA is so important. And I would add something about why it's important to have a Democratic president. Now, you may have heard about one of the candidates for president this year that talks a good game on trade, but outsources a lot of his production. And let me talk for a second about that. And I did that with Ed this last week. The suit I have on is a suit made about 6 miles from here by union workers. And you don't. Not to mention the Chevy Cruze that my wife drives from Youngstown, and the Jeep Cherokee that I drive made in Toledo, but that's a whole other story. But it just says to me that when I look at one of the candidates for president that talks a good game on trade, outsources his own production in many, many cases, his line of clothes and other things, that opposes the minimum wage, that supports right to work, that opposes a prevailing wage, you know what that means to the people we care most about in this country, people that aren't getting a fair shake, and how important the union movement is to prosperity for our future. That to me really tells the whole story. My first involvement with environmental issues, I was a senior in high school. It was 1970. Many of you remember the date that the environmental movement kind of took off. It really isn't exactly the date, but April 22nd, 1970 was a memorable day nationally, as you know, in the environmental movement. And I organized at my high school. I was kind of always done this organizing thing. I organized at my high school the first Earth Day March, and we got about 700 or 800 kids, and mostly young people. We marched down Park Avenue West in Mansfield, Ohio, and we marched to the square. And because I didn't have Leo Gerard or anybody, Lee or Bob Park or anybody telling me what to do, we didn't plan. We get to the square, we had no microphone, we had no speakers, we never thought, oh, you're supposed to do something more. So I learned something that day because I felt really stupid, and I can't believe I'm telling you this story, because I did feel stupid. But we've come, but you know, think back in the environmental movement in those days when people really did think it was the environmental movement or it was labor, and that's why what's happened in the last 10 years with blue-green, the last 7 or 8 years with this administration is so important. From growing our wind and solar energies to in industries to increasing efficiency, there's no question that we made significant progress. For the first time in the history of the industrial age, economic growth is no longer tied to an increase in carbon emissions. We know that now. It's only a start, but dozens of nations are showing it can be done. The landmark Paris Climate Agreement not only sets the stage for long-term reduction in carbon emissions, but it will provide opportunities for American businesses, for manufacturers, for entrepreneurs to lead the world in these new and emerging technologies. Whether it's the Boilermakers or in the Babcock and Wilcox plant 40 miles from here in Barberton, Ohio, making efficient, highly efficient boilers, to the steel workers in maybe the world's most efficient steel mill, ArcelorMittal, about 4 miles from here. First time ever in the world where one person hour produces 1 ton of steel, to the 1,000 workers in Toledo making solar panels. If we do this in America, we can do this work in America, and if we don't, other nations will. Protecting these investments and these gains have to be a priority. Next month, in this hotel and hotels throughout Cleveland, another convention is coming to this city. You're going to hear a lot of talk at that convention that amounts to putting heads in the sand, that denies basic science, that walks away from the international community, and that undermines the progress we've made in environmental and worker issues. We can't let that happen. We need to build on the success that we've had. In the past, I've spoken with Secretary Moniz, the Energy Secretary, about how we address climate change while ensuring that domestic industries aren't left behind. It's important that your activism continue, particularly as a labor and environmental movement coming together, especially the utility workers, especially the plumbers and pipe fitters, especially the steel workers that have done so much. Moniz and I agree about clean energy innovation, that it's the key not only to reducing emissions, but increasing the competitiveness of our economy and growing new jobs. American manufacturers must be positioned to attract capital and to win global clean technology market share. I believe we need a concrete strategy to support our own domestic manufacturers. Without one, we risk creating demand for clean energy that will just lead to more imports and more jobs created abroad rather than at home. 70% of America's clean energy systems and components are currently produced abroad. I mean, think about that. When we talk about job loss and we talk about clean energy, and we heard that argument that you can't have good jobs and good environmental policy, yet so much of this new technology we are failing to build in this country. It tells you a whole lot about winning that argument. We supply less than 10% of the global solar component market, even though the solar cell was born in America. Half of our existing wind turbines were manufactured overseas, And I come from a community where at Plum Brook, a NASA facility just 40 miles from here, 45 miles from here in Sandusky, much of the technology was developed there. We are about to embark with the Department of Energy grant in a lot of local investment with building wind turbines in Lake Erie. It will be the first, thank you. It will be the first major investment of wind turbines in freshwater, having a whole lot different challenges from saltwater, as you can guess, of freshwater in the world. Lake Erie is the shallowest of the Great Lakes. It's 40, 50, 60 feet deep here. Other Great Lakes are as much as several hundred feet deep, so you can do it here when you couldn't do it elsewhere. I would also add that we're able to, that we have real opportunity dealing with fixing methane leaks, putting lots and lots and lots of plumbers and pipe fitters to work in making and dealing with climate change in an important way. We need to, let me talk for a moment and then in conclusion about as we diversify our energy sector, we as a nation have a duty to the workers in the communities and the regions whose hard work has powered our country for generations. We need a serious plan for strengthening these communities, investing in our workers, ensuring that good-paying jobs replace those lost to our nations in the world's energy markets as they continue to evolve. In the coming weeks, I will introduce legislation to help workers in coal country transition to new jobs and new industries. We need to give workers more notice of impending layoffs and plant closures so that families and communities have more time to prepare and to look for new opportunities. We need to give laid-off workers in these industries extended unemployment insurance benefits. These workers are facing large barriers to find a new job, larger than your average worker. We need to give, partly because of their location, partly because of the work they've done, we need to give them the time to pursue longer-term training, sometimes transitioning to an entirely new industry. And we need, and we need to invest directly in coal communities. Generations of families have worked in mines or power plants with the hope of providing their families with a better life. I challenge all of you to offer your support to these workers in these communities, starting with fixing the mine workers' pension and health care fund, which we ought to be able to do in the House and Senate. We have to do it before the end of this year. Understanding mine workers, that we owe that to them. We also owe it to their widows. And as you know, mine workers are more likely to have living widows than most other business, most other industries because of the condition of the work. The work you're doing is so important. You're showing we can create jobs and grow local communities through clean energy. That's what we do when we invest in supporting new industries and upgrading old ones. It's what we do when we invest in upgrading and greening our infrastructure, particularly our water infrastructure. Those of you from Cleveland know how important it is to Cuyahoga County. We can promote energy independence. We can put Americans back to work. We can secure a healthier planet for our children. Chief Seattle is often quoted at events like this where he said, "The earth does not belong to man, man belongs to earth." When I look at where we are in this country, whether it's the presidential election this year and the fact we have a president now, and I'm hopeful we have a president in the future that's going to use every possible means, working with Congress, but working sometimes around Congress to do the right thing on clean energy, the right thing on labor standards, to do the right thing on energy overall, to do the right thing on the environment, it makes it that much more important. I'll close with this. About 50 years ago, a civil rights leader in Mississippi said, "Don't tell me what you believe, show me what you do, and I'll tell you what you believe." When I look at the trade union movement, when I look at the environmental movement, when I look at what blue-green has done for our country already and will do in the next 10 and 20 and 30 years, it's clear that everybody in this room is showing the world what you believe. I thank you for your activism. Thanks.